tonight's meeting from the boardroom. The meeting will be open to the public. The public portion of the meeting will be broadcast live. The recording being made available after the meeting as well. We will be leaving this first public part of the evening for executive session, but we do plan to return at approximately 6 p.m. for the remainder of the public session. The ground rules for the meeting will be as such. First of all, we're going to need to take a roll. So we have one of our members, Mr. Van Sickle, is at home, is unable to come tonight. So we will take a roll so that he has an indication as to who's present. So when I call your name, if you would simply say that you are present. Matthew Paul? Here. Ronnie Gotfelty? Present. Monica?
Present.
And Jason? Jason Van Sickle?
Present.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Just a moment, then I'll turn the meeting over to the superintendent, who will take the chair for the election of officers for the upcoming school year. So, Madam Superintendent, the chair is yours.
All right, thank you very much. At this time, I will open the floor for nominations for President of the Garrett County Board of Education for the 22 year.
I'll nominate Tom Woods.
Okay, so we have a nomination to for Mr. Woods to remain as president. Do I have a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by Mr. Van Sickle. Discussion.
Do you need a campaign speech now? I think Tom's done a great job, and if we're in a time of transition right now, and it's probably good to keep our leadership pretty much the same as it's been the last year.
I'm assuming you accept the nomination?
Well, as I said, if that's the will of the board, sure. I have more time than anybody, so I guess everybody else has jobs and things to do.
All right.
Yep, that's what I can.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of Mr. Woods remaining as president for the 2022 year, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Nay. Nay. 3 ayes, 1 nay. The motion carries. Congratulations, Mr. Woods.
Thank you. At this time, we'll elect a vice president. So the floor is now open for nominations for vice president.
I nominate Rodney as vice president.
Okay, Rodney, you've been nominated as vice president. Second, Rodney? Will you accept, Rodney?
Yes, the vice president, I would accept.
Is that a second, Matthew?
I'll second.
Okay, then moved and second, moved by Monica, second by Matthew, that Rodney Gotfelty be the vice president for 2022. Any discussion? Those in favor of Rodney as vice president for 2022, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And it is unanimous, so.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gotfelty.
Okay, so to move on, under section 3-305B of the General Provisions Article of Maryland Annotated Code, there are 2 reasons that the board will go into closed session this evening. To discuss the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of employees, or officials over whom this public body has jurisdiction. Any other personnel matter that affects one or more specific individuals. To conduct collective bargaining negotiations or consider matters that relate to negotiations. Specifically, the topics will be personnel topic 3-305B1, superintendent evaluations. 3-305B9, negotiation topics include Garrett County Employee Health Care Trust and salary modeling for blueprint compliance. The reason these topics will be discussed in closed session instead of open session is as follows. collective bargaining negotiation topics pursuant to 3-305B9. Disclosed above will be considered a closed session rather than open session due to the confidential nature of the negotiations process. The personnel topic pursuant to 3-305B1, disclosed above will be considered a closed session rather than open session because they include a discussion of specific employees, which is confidential employment matter. Is there any objection by any board member going into executive session? Hearing none, is there a motion to do so?
I moved.
Motion by Monica, is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Gladfelty. All those in favor of going to executive session, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? And we are in executive session.
and Mr. Jason Van Sickle were in attendance. Also in attendance for part or all of the meeting were Ms. Barbara Baker, Superintendent, Mr. Brennan Hoover, Board Attorney, Dr. Jane Wilderson, Director of Human Resources, Dr. Nicole Miller, Chief Academic Officer, Mrs. Allison Schweitzer, Director of Finance, Mr. Richard Wojlowski, Director of Maintenance, Facilities, Operations, and Transportation, and Ms. Karen Brewer, Executive Assistant to the Superintendent. Dr. David Lieber, Educational Facilities Planning, LLC, attended the meeting to present an administrative function topic. December 15th, 2021 meeting, the Board of Education met in executive session on Wednesday, December 15th, 2021 at 12:02 p.m. under Authority 3-305 of the General Provisions Article of the Annotated Code of Maryland to discuss the following items: personnel topics pursuant to 3-305B1. Matthew Paugh made a motion to move to executive session, and Jason Van Sickle seconded the motion. Thereafter, the board unanimously voted to close the session with a yea vote from Rodney Gotfelty, Matthew Paugh, Monica Rinker, and Jason Van Sickle. Jason Van Sickle made a motion to approve the executive session agenda, and Matthew Paugh seconded the motion. Thereafter, the board unanimously voted to approve the agenda with a yea vote from Rodney Gotfelty, Matthew Paugh, Monica Rinker, and Jason Van Sickle. The topics discussed in the closed session included the following: professional leave request. Ms. Barbara Baker, Superintendent, discussed a professional leave request for the board. Rodney Gotfelty made a motion to approve the professional leave request, and Jason Van Sickle seconded the motion. Final resolution, motion carried with yea votes from Monica Rinker, Rodney Gotfelty, Matthew Paugh, and Jason Van Sickle. Superintendent evaluation, the board discussed and completed the superintendent evaluation. Jason Van Sickle made a motion to adjourn the executive session, and Rodney Gotfelty seconded the motion. The board unanimously approved adjourning the executive session at 2:09 p.m. with yea votes from Monica Rinker, Matthew Paugh, Rodney Gotfelty, and Jason Van Sickle. Mr. Tom Woods, Board President, Ms. Monica Rinker, Board Vice President, and Board members Mr. Rodney Gotfelty, Dr. Matthew Paugh, and Mr. Jason Van Sickle were in attendance. Ms. Barbara Baker, Superintendent, was also in attendance at the meeting.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. All right, announcements. January 14th will be a staff development day. Students dismissed 3 hours early. January 17th, schools will be closed for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. January 24th, parent-teacher conferences, schools closed, and January 27th is a professional day with students dismissed 3 hours early. Just a note, the professional day is a floating day and will fall on the 91st day of school. The 91st day of the school year will float in the event of inclement weather. Due to school closing on January 7th, 2022, this day was moved from January 6th to January 27th, 2022. New date added to the budget calendar, April 4th, 2022, the Board of County Commissioners meeting at the courthouse at 4 p.m. The Board of Education Superintendent will present the fiscal year proposed 2023 budget.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to assessments. Maryland State Assessment Results 2021. I think, Ryan, you were making that presentation for us.
Comment?
For me?
Honor?
Yeah, sure.
Oh,
I'm sorry. We're going to do it at 7 o'clock. So we may have to interrupt you at 7 for public comment.
Hopefully I'm not talking to
Like that, as long as you need. You don't know how many questions you're going to be asking.
Okay. So tonight's presentation is both the Garrett County Public Schools and also the State of Maryland assessment results for 2021. This presentation, not in this particular order, will cover the high school assessments for spring 2021, the elementary and middle, early fall assessments, which we delivered at the beginning of this year. And all of these assessments were basically delivered as we exited the virtual learning and the emergency response to the pandemic. This slide right here provides background on why these assessments were necessary. The U.S. Department of Education in February of 2021 basically said that the mandated tests for English language arts, mathematics, and science needed to occur, but there would be flexibility in the implementation of those. As a result of that, the Maryland State Board of Education approved the plan to administer early fall assessments for grades 3 through 8 and also the high schools in a shortened form. They also gave districts which are semesterized, which is Garrett County Public Schools were one of those in the state, the option to test in spring of 2021. for the high school assessments. Yes.
What does shortened form mean? Like it was half a test they normally would do, or I'm just,
So in the early fall assessments that the kids took when they returned to school this year, that was shortened form. In most cases, it was 2 or less sessions or sections, and they were shortened in total length of time, where traditionally kids will sit for 4 sessions in a particular test. So for, you know, the exact example for mathematics was a 20-minute section and a 40-minute section, and that was all they took, where traditionally they would take, you know, 445 or 460, depending on what level they're at. The spring 2021 high school assessments, which I will explain at the end of this, those were 4 full sections. So that was more of a traditional test. Okay. What you will see different throughout this presentation, as we exited Park was always reported in 5 performance levels, okay? Both the spring assessments for high school and also the fall assessments were reported in 3 performance levels. And we'll go over those levels. And there's a graphic at the bottom of this slide. Approached expectations was a 1, met expectations was a 2, and exceeded expectations was a 3. I'm pulling this slide directly from the MSDE presentation that was delivered to the state board, referencing a national study that is just kind of calculating the learning loss across the nation. So you can see the bullet point here for math. In most cases, it was a 14.2 percentage point decline that occurred across the nation, and then a 6.3 percentage point decline in ELA. The longer you were not in person for instruction, the greater the decline is basically what, and I think we're all aware of that, and it's been reported enough. I think this is an important slide because it speaks to the total number of students that were tested during this administration. You can see that there's a 2019 is in gray and 2021 is in blue on this bar graph here. It's important to go back to 2019 because that's the last true administration that we had of state testing, full state testing. So you can see a considerable drop in each of the content areas and the total number of students tested. And then over on the right of this slide is the actual amount of students that were tested virtually. Garrett County Public Schools did not complete any virtual testing. We did not administer any virtual tests in either the spring or the early fall block. All of our tests were delivered in person. This is a graphic of the 24 districts in the state of Maryland, including Baltimore City, and it takes a look at participation rates around the state. You can see that Garrett County is showing here as 95% greater participation in English language arts. Our actual estimated participation rate is 98%, so we are at the top of the scale of as far as getting our students in and getting them tested. This next slide is in mathematics. Same thing for participation rates. It runs relatively close to the first slide, but again, we're running at 98% participation rates for those that we anticipated would test with us. This is the overall data, the way that it was reported by the state. There's a slight difference in the way this data is being reported this time. Typically, it comes in grades 3 through 8, but this is 3 through high school, just in these, you know, large percentages right now. So early fall 2021, 35% proficiency rate. So when we talk about those 3 level of performances, this is a 2 or a 3, either meeting or exceeding expectations. A 35% pass rate around the state or proficiency level, and a 15% for math. Off to the right of this slide, you had the percent proficiency for the 2018-19 school year, which I mentioned earlier was the last full official true administration of state testing. with no thought of the pandemic in mind. And you can see the pass rates there, and it correlates relatively close to the study that was shared earlier. I'm going to reference that a lot, 2018-19 data, as I move forward, so I just highlight it there. Probably familiar with this slide. The last time Mr. Morris presented it, this is the 19% proficient rate for ELA, grades 3 through 8. Little tiny to see on the screen here, but kind of highlight where Maryland, the state average was at that particular time for meeting or exceeding, which was 43%. And GCPS grades, and again, this is 3 through 8 data. Grades 3 through 8 in ELA were 39.6, or just under 40% meeting or exceeding, so not too far off the state average at that point. And just because I think it's important to know where you stand around the state, you're ranked, 17 out of 24 districts. So this is where we are with the early fall block data. So in Maryland, we had 65% of students approaching, or 35% meeting or exceeding. Garrett County Public Schools was 74% approached and 26% met or exceeded. And again, I had the student counts. The new platform, Pearson Access, provides us a lot more detail as far as the graphs and charts and that are coming out of this, but you got the breakdown of the students there below, and you can see exactly how many students matches up with that performance level. Yeah.
So you have 3 categories there. What about the students that just didn't do well at all? I mean, I don't know what it means to approach.
Approached as you opened it up and you answered questions.
So that covers everybody.
It covers everyone, yes. Whereas previously it was 5 levels, and 3 was approached.
Yeah. So they're only doing 3 levels.
Yeah, 3 levels for this administration. When we return to normal testing in the spring, this coming spring, it will go to 4 levels.
Okay.
Okay.
So what level will they add? Because it used to be level 1, did not yet meet expectations. Level 2, partially met expectations. Level 3, approached expectations. Level 4, met expectations. And level 5, exceeded. So they're going to either have level 1 or 2 they'll add then?
I believe it will be, you'll still have the 3 that are up here, but you will also have does not meet or the first level.
The first one is did not yet meet.
Did not yet meet, I think will be closer to the language of the level 1.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to disseminate a person that opened it versus one that really actually answers your question.
No, absolutely. No, absolutely. And I think that you'll see as we move forward, 50% of no district had greater than 50% of their students meet or exceed in ELA or math. So that's a large chunk of approached in some districts.
So we had pretty good participation, 98%, 97%.
Yeah.
How does that affect your relative placement in the state? If you have a jurisdiction that has 80%, aren't the 80% selective and the kids that get tested? And we're testing everybody apparently.
We did our best, due diligence to test every single child that showed up, but that includes with all the complexity of quarantine that's occurring right now. We had a tremendous amount of makeup going on in our buildings, and I think that's reflected in that 98% participation rate. When we try to think about students that weren't tested, those are, unfortunately, I don't want to, completely speculate, but those are students that you probably lost track of during the pandemic, and you're still having a difficulty returning to school. You have some people that have separated from the public school system, and then you have some that were caught up in the quarantining issues, but because the districts further east of us are much larger, a lot of moving parts to try to pull off all that makeup testing if they're not there on the scheduled days. So I would tend to believe if the student did not test, most likely they might fall into that approached category, which drags on the state, which would drag the state averages even lower than they currently are.
And it would probably affect our placement.
Oh, 100%.
We might go up if
It might go
if
slightly
everybody
up.
else was testing 98%.
Mhm.
That's the point.
No, absolutely, yeah. So this is the way the State Board of Education decided to share, because and the reason I included this is because if I go back to this one, the state of Maryland was famous for ranking us all in order. But then this last board meeting, they decided to put it in alpha and not share the actual percentages coming out of each of the counties. But I do think it's important for referencing to know where you stand within the state. Highlighted in red, or circled in red, excuse me, all local school systems have at least 50% of students scoring in a performance level 1, which is that approaching level in both ELA and mathematics. Again, highlighting the point, because if you go back here to 2019, you had 7 districts that scored above 50% in their 8 ELA performance. So currently, and that's my really rudimentary way to rank us at that point, placing that graphical line over top to just kind of see where we kind of cap out at compared to the other districts. So I'm estimating that we are currently around 19 out of 24. And again, I've included those percentages there to the left. So if we go to mathematics for grades 3 through 8, the Maryland state average was 33%, meeting or exceeding. In 2019, GCPS was at 28.2. That ranked us 18 out of 24 at that particular time. This is the early fall block results. Maryland math, 85% approached, 15% met or exceeded. And again, remember, this is not just 3 through 8 at this point. This is 3 up through Algebra 2 and Geometry, Algebra 1, because all the high school assessments were included in this as well. And GCPS is 87% approached and 13% met or exceeded. And again, the student total numbers are included at the bottom of the slide as well. So then this is the performance level comparison from the same slide shared by the State Board of Education for mathematics. Again, the list is in alpha order. I'm estimating that we came in around 14 out of 24. And again, you can see just around the state in general, the hit taken in mathematics was considerable. I do feel like we come out on a level playing field due to that, because we are so close to the state average, and there's over 400,000 students tested. This is the Algebra 1 data now as I'm moving into high school. So this is 2019. GCPS was 31% pass rate, meeting or exceeding. Maryland was 27.2. That ranked us 13 out of 24. And this is where it becomes slightly different than the early fall block testing. This is the spring 2021 high school testing. And I have circled in red up there that only 3,877 students actually took this test. And I think it's important to think about who they were. You'll see the bullet below the graphic that Carroll, Baltimore City, Garrett, and Worcester tested in spring 2021. I was doing my best to pronounce that. All right.
Like the star.
And this was new question sets in 4 full sessions. So I do want to stress that both the spring test in 2021 and these early fall tests, both the math and ELA tests in Maryland, are under construction, for layman's terms. And so students are seeing new question sets. That's why we didn't see the performance levels the way they traditionally have been shared. That's also why we don't have a true scale score for each student right now, because all the tests are under construction and will continue to be in the spring 2022 administration, because they need to continue doing range finding on all the question sets. and then establish what the new scale scores will be for passing, especially at high school, in the high school assessment. You can see that we were about 4 percentage points off in both categories, both approached and met or exceeded. I will say that Carroll and Worcester are traditionally in the top 5 for mathematics, both 3 through 8 and Algebra 1. So even with that traditional track record for those folks, they're kind of in the same boat that we are. This is the ELA 10 assessment, 42% for the Maryland state average, meeting or exceeding, again, coming out of 2019. And then GCPS was sitting at 40%, ranked as 19 out of 24. And this is currently where the ELA assessment is sitting for the spring of 2021. And again, this would be our high school students, ELA 10. 2,841 students tested in this block. The same 4 counties participated, and we are approximately 10 percentage points off of where the state average was for meeting or exceeding. And this is about 1,000 students less than the math data that came out of spring 2021. And you can't, you know, there's no information shared about the other districts, so it's hard to gauge, but there's definitely a drop in participation because if we go back, we were at 254 for math for Algebra 1 and 245 for ELA, so very close to the cohort being exactly perfect. So now I'm going to move into science reporting. This would be the MESA, Maryland Integrated Science Assessment for grade, with students taking grades 5 and 8. So this is the first time that the state sees a positive data point coming out of the pandemic. In 2018-19, the last time students in grades 5 and 8 were tested, there was a 33% proficiency rate. This time, coming out of this early fall block, there were 39. It was a 39% proficiency rate.
Any explanation?
I would say my best guess would be that this assessment has been in place for several years and was before the pandemic, where I mentioned earlier that the math and ELA tests are under construction. So teachers have been teaching toward this assessment for a longer period of time. And we did a really nice job. Kudos to our teachers in grades 5 and 8. In this slide, the data is reported as grades 6 and 9, because obviously they're taking the assessment from the previous grade level. But it's estimated that GCPS ranked 11th out of 24 for the combined 5 and 8 data. And you can see the kind of rankings. Again, this was an alpha slide in the state presentation with no percentages shared for the other districts. This is where we are with total student counts and also like performance level data. It says grade 6 science. Those would have been, they took the 5th grade test, so our 5th graders last year. We had a 41% met and 2% exceeded. And then for the grade 8, which is reported as grade 9, 33 and 0% for exceeded. But you can also see the total number of students. High school MESA early fall block data is currently embargoed. It won't be shared publicly until the January 25th State Board of Education meeting, but I have been able to review that data, and it is very favorable for Garrett County Public Schools. It follows the trend of the 5 and 8 data, and we did a nice job at that level. Looking forward to sharing that. This is the KRA, Kindergarten Readiness Assessment. This slide shows the 2 previous administrations. This test is delivered in person and is completed on a one-on-one basis. So even last year when we had an opportunity to well, I should say, last year, we did not have an opportunity to test for the KRA. This year, we did conduct this in person, and so did the rest of the state. And it does appear to be like a full administration as far as those that joined us for kindergarten this year. You can see that it dropped about 7 percentage points across the state and this is traditionally shared in 3 performance level with emerging, approaching, and demonstrating. This was shared in performance level ranking. So this came out of the same State Board of Education presentation, and that to me is a signal that the state feels that this is very valid data because this administration of this test was under all the same conditions that it would have been administered in a previous year. Total same amount of length, same question set, delivered in person. So you can see that Garrett County ranks about 8th here in our performance. And this is what our performance looked like for our kindergarten cohort. We had 44% students demonstrating readiness, 40% approaching readiness, and 15% emerging. And then this is the KRA drop across the state, where each district is kind of, the percentage points that they dropped from their traditional KRA score versus where we are now. And you can see there are some extremely significant drops in counties around the state. And that brings me to the end, and if you have any questions.
Questions?
Kindergarten readiness, Garrett County, I know 5, 6, 7 years ago, we were near the top, second in the state, sometimes first. Carroll County usually looks higher than us, but I think a lot of it it's not just the school system, it's all the support systems that are in place in the community and everything that helps to bring that score up. And during the pandemic, I think some of that fell to the wayside. Because you just couldn't do home visitations, you couldn't do a lot of things that traditionally we've done in Garrett County. So it's still nice that we're in the top 6 counties or so, but
yeah, absolutely. And
it's a shame we're not at the top.
And prior care is a big determining factor in successful assessment.
That's good. Good report.
Obviously, the next chapter is how do we close those numbers, the acceptable numbers, which
Absolutely.
obviously is a big challenge everybody has in the state. But,
Absolutely. So I think we spoke to some of that in the December presentation with the recovery plan and a lot of the steps that were outlined for all the major content areas. But we'll continue to do that. Right now, we're in the second diagnostic round for the iReady and mathematics, which we'll be able to have growth numbers by the end of January that shows the growth that we've made since, they took that assessment in September to where we currently rest. And preliminary data is showing we're heading in the right direction right now, but I'll definitely be able to summarize that better at the end of January.
okay. Let me try to get you on the February board meeting then, so.
No, absolutely. I think it's important for parents, students,
Sure.
teachers, everyone to understand that positive steps are being taken.
Well,
Any of these tests at the high school level, do the students have to pass in order to graduate?
It's all sit for right now as we exit the pandemic for the last couple cohorts.
Mm-hmm.
And will continue to be sit for because the tests are under construction right now. So even, and this is not a message I like to deliver. I'm saying jokingly, like a lot of the high school assessments, the word got out last spring that all you had to do was sit for the test and take it, so sometimes that can affect performance levels.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously it affected everywhere across the state.
Yeah.
I think the message we want to send to our students is this is not going to stop you from graduating. We'd like to see you put your best foot forward in participation. And it is all sit for. Current January testing cycle that we're going through in high school and also the spring assessment will be as well.
Okay. I was just comparing, I know this is several years ago, from
Yeah.
2015 and 16. I believe one of you made a comment about our signs, how it looked they were pretty high, the numbers. But when I looked then, I mean, it says basic, proficient, and advanced. And like you said, the one assessment's like 5th and 8th grade. This actually has it broke down, like 5th by itself, 8th by itself. But like in 2016, in the county for basic, we was 29.4%. Proficient, 63.2, which ultimately you want to aim to get more in the, not called proficient, what is it, met expectations. And then we had 7.4 advanced. So I know over the COVID the past year and the students not being in the school, doing a lot of virtual, and yes, you did say some of the kids probably were joking about it, I'm sure, did make an impact on scores all over. But when I look back from 2016 and 2015, there's a percentage difference. Like, I don't know how we get back on track, but I mean, you give some things that we're going to be doing. And then didn't we get not too long ago, a new math curriculum and our English curriculum, correct?
English curriculum,
Okay,
not math.
something.
Math
Okay.
is coming,
Math.
that's actually needs to be addressed. But, the English last year was the first full implementation of our ARC, American Reading Core Series, curriculum, and it was in the middle of pandemic. So we certainly think that has some impact, because we're trying to implement a new program in the middle of a very challenging year, and our scores at elementary level tend to be reflective of that. So this year is kind of a reset year for that curriculum.
I know you don't want to teach students to the test, but you're hopeful that the curriculum you're teaching has all been, a lot of input, and it's good, but you're hoping that somehow it'll line up and, we'll get higher in the state of Maryland for our scores.
Part of that too, Brian, that you touched on is the construction of the test. We went through that when I was at Southern, with the test changed. And it took a while for the teachers to realize what's the new things that they need to learn. And there's a learning curve there for the teacher that takes a couple of years. That's why I think science has done so well, but the test hasn't changed. But because the other two did change, it takes a little while. Of course, the pandemic throws everything off. I guess the only thing I would say as a final thought about it, I'm a little bit disappointed in how they measured it. Because to measure somebody who opened it up, signed their name against somebody who answered, a dozen questions pretty successfully, get the same score, doesn't really tell us anything.
It's the logistics of the test being under construction. Pearson to go through and set the 3 performance levels and figure out what each scale score was going to be to separate all that. But then their greater need and focus is really for the upcoming assessment cycle when they were going to return to full length. To put it in perspective, I believe that math students saw 18 questions total in grades 3 through 8, which is a pretty small sample size compared to, and then when you talk about the modeling and the reasoning, they only saw 2 questions in each of those domains. So when I look at preliminary reports, kid got a 0, 50, or 100 in that particular domain, and that's. So I think these assessments proves what we all knew, and they just use them to say this is where the gaps currently exist coming out of the pandemic. So
I would also say it's important to make sure that we're comparing apples to apples, because in 2015-16, if you're talking ELA and math, we would be at PARC, which it was a completely different test. I would think PARC, right, down 15-16.
15-16 would be PARC.
Which was a completely different test. And then you had, the creation of MCAP and then this modified version of MCAP. So we just have to be careful too when we look at the scores to make sure it's the same test that we're actually comparing against.
And a lot of times in test preparation, you're looking for released items. And because both tests are currently under construction right now, we don't have a question set or released test examples. And you're not going to see that probably for another 2 years. In science right now, in 5 and 8, we actually have released items. And I even have released items from the early fall administration that I've shared with 5th and 8th grade teachers to show them how the kids were tested for this last administration and how they performed on certain question sets. We won't have that for ELA or math for another 2 years. And because the test will be moving to computer adaptive, they need question sets that are much larger in size before they start releasing items. You know, because eventually our students are not, you know, right now you can see a random sampling, kids in the same room won't see the same question.
Right.
But in the future, it's really going to take them to their particular level. So very similar to the way like some of our diagnostics internally function right now.
I was just asking to make sure that we have our correct tools in place for the teachers to be able to, it's not only the teachers, it's that we have the correct tools and learning materials for them too. That's my question.
And this data will be in the teacher's hands a lot quicker in the future. All the charts that you saw, and you know, even though it'll be in four performance levels, teachers will have individual access to that platform. Like right now, I hate to be talking about so far in advance, but it is an important component because within 48 hours, sometimes in the future, these next 2 cycles of tests, but in the future, within 48 hours, you'll get the assessment results, the preliminary results. And that's great information before a kid leaves your class, especially if it's in April, because then the next teacher can have that data in their hand when they're getting their roster for the fall, whereas there's always a lag right now.
Can this information be broken down by school?
It can.
So you can see our high-performing schools and our low-performing schools in these areas, right?
Yes,
Okay.
you can, yes. And that's, I mean, that's the way we've always been traditionally been able to do it, but yeah, you can definitely see it by school breakdown.
A final question. So like say maybe, for example, in math, there's one component that a lot of students aren't getting. It would reflect, you would get that reflection back to let the teachers know, like this piece, a lot of us are struggling on, we need to work more on this one element. Is that, it reflect in that, correct?
Yes, so you can get the data from this administration reported by item or by standard. And even though we can't see the question, we can read the standard and really understand what was being asked of the students.
Right.
And yes, I have shared with teachers, and we're trying to message sample items that we've created that address some of the standards that we know were a little deficient in this last administration. And I do think targeting towards certain standards that are frequently tested is a great strategy and one that we should implement even more. If you're playing a game, you would like to know the rules of the game, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's an important factor.
It's the most important factor. You have to know what they're looking for before you teach that. Thank you. We appreciate it very much. We do have a couple of gentlemen who'd like to speak in public. So.
I'd really just like to thank Mr. Schultz. He has done a phenomenal job through this entire process, which through the pandemic has been incredibly difficult. There's so many changes and so many differences. And I just really want to thank you so much because you've been a wonderful help. And we talked today about the next steps as far as how we can work towards bringing these scores up. And we're working towards that every day, and we'll continue to articulate that for you. Brian has done a wonderful job, and it's much appreciated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move on to public comment. The Garrett County Board of Education is pleased to receive comments and ideas from our public pertaining to policies, procedures, and/or practices of the school system. We ask that comments be limited to a maximum time of 3 minutes per individual unless otherwise considered by the board president. There will be no discussion or action taken at this meeting, but may be considered at a future meeting. Issues that are specific to individual employees should be referred to the immediate supervisor for appropriate consideration and review. Rude, slanderous, or threatening remarks or other behavior that is disruptive or interferes with the order of the meeting is not permitted. With that being said, James, we'll start with you. Just come up and you take your mask off. If you would announce your names as you come up.
My name is James Parsons, and actually I have stuff for you guys to look at in reference to.
Sure.
Is that okay if I hand it to you?
So Jane will get it for you.
Listen here needs to, not be locked here, listen here goes to Mr. Clerk. Make sure I don't. get it.
Mr. Wood. Okay.
Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, guys.
That's okay.
Yeah, and that's it, the rest of the,
Okay.
you guys might have to share.
It's fine.
Here's one middle school and one high school.
Just the board members. You could give one for me.
Sorry, I didn't make enough, guys.
That's perfectly fine. We're used to sharing.
All right, again, my name is James Parsons. I've seen a survey. It's a young, risk behavior survey. My 13-year-old boy mentioned, the school was given a drug and alcohol survey. It was still at school in his backpack. We never received it. He said we did not have to sign it if we was okay with it, for him to take it. No signature required. At the time, we had no clue what the questions, what it was about, or about anything else other than drugs and alcohol use. About a month later, my 18-year-old daughter mentioned survey to the students about a month back. These are her words, not mine. LGBTQ questions. My 15-year-old son entered the conversation as well. Both were uncomfortable with the questions. My son refused to take it and was put down by other students for not taking the survey. My daughter took the survey, but did not answer it truthfully because it made her uncomfortable, making the survey pointless. She did not because she was uncomfortable. We were not informed about this survey, period, to taking the survey by information sent home. We, excuse me, guys. We were completely unaware that there were sexual questions that surveyed. We did not know and give our permission for our children to take a survey. We were not handed or nor email forms released to the survey. Just how many parents were unaware as we were. Upon my investigation taken to other parents, there is a lot of parents who had no clue about the full content of the survey, let alone the survey itself. My next step was to make some calls to get some answers and a copy of the questions. I had to call several people. Many of them did not know or had no clue about it. I was also told that I might not have permission to see the survey. I was finally given a link to check it out and was stunned what I seen. So the questions at the high school, mostly sexual questions that had nothing to do with safety, drugs, or tobacco. The way they give this data was wrong in small groups in classrooms, and where teachers single out the children, classrooms, the answers given describing themselves. If you guys look through 1 through 7, it asks your height, your weight, if you're a male, describes themselves, and asks whether, let you guys catch up, I'm sorry. In sexual questions, again, LGBTQ or straight questions 8 and 9, if you guys want to look at that. The questions, I'll let you guys read it for a second. Give me a little bit. From 10 to 58, we did not have an issue with that, because it was actually drugs and alcohol, in, what was supposed to be asked. Question 5965 is related to such questions, behaviors, but should be asked in a sex ed class with parent permissions, and they should be given their status from the questions that they, and the following questions, 67, 60, or 78, and 80, about asking, food, fruits, vegetables, sodas, dental, visions, weathers, or taking gym classes, working out, whichever has to do with risk behavior, and tobacco, drugs. Why is all I am asking? Question 79, about AIDS. Why wasn't it, should be a sex question in sex ed? Why was the singled out also leaving the teachers to see the children may have disagree with, be easy for the teacher to find out who the child and the person described being is, what is taking a small group of students. Question 82, if a child has COVID, okay, been tested for, it is the risk, what does it have to do with risk, drug, and alcohol questions? my last point here, question 95, 99 should have been the first questions of these surveys above than the sexual questions. And if you look at 8 and 9, if you look through all of this, it's the next question below number 9, it says the next 4 questions ask above safety. If you look over 8, there's nothing there to describe that. And, you know, I went through this very thorough, and me personally, I don't see the fundamental educational why that these questions couldn't have been put in the sex ed, these questions, not a survey to get information. And I'm very shocked and I'm very upset about it, and that's why I'm a little bit nervous. You know, I don't know what the thing was for asking these questions, and I've also called downstate and asked them the same questions because I know this is a statewide questionnaire, and a lot of people and a lot of parents did not know that these questions and how it was presented to us. Because any other time, though, if you want to take your kids down, go on a bus trip, we have to have a permission, yes or no. Why wasn't that done the same way? Now, I've asked several administrations.
Okay, I'm good.
Sorry.
No, you're good. I think you've certainly addressed your concerns. We've heard them. What I'm going to ask, obviously our board policy is we don't have a discussion about it, but I am going to ask Dr. Miller to explain the rationale as to why we do the test, because the survey
Sure.
rather, I'm sorry, the survey. She'll explain as to what the board's position is with the survey.
So my understanding in respect to the survey, based on what we have looked into, is that it is given in accordance with state law. And I don't have those statutes memorized, but I can certainly get them for you. I have it on a piece of paper. But it is given in accordance with state law. It is mandatory. It is given with, the leads are the Maryland Health Department and the Maryland State Department of Education. And they coordinate this survey. Certainly someone in their area develops all the questions specific to the survey. They, from what we can gather, disseminate it to every county within the state of Maryland as a mandatory survey that we have to participate in. It's every 2 years, usually in an even year. They had to push it back because of COVID. So that's why it was obviously given this last fall. It is something that we do work collaboratively with the state on to ensure that we administer it in accordance with state law. There is an opt-out process. That is the process of Maryland Health Department and MSDE. That is the process that they give to us. We implement it. So that satisfies what you.
Yeah, I think it's important to understand that we're following, use a better word, our bosses, who tell us what we must do. We must provide this to all the students. There are opt-out options. One of the options, in the front of the thing is, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to. You can leave them all blank if you want to. That's your option if you want to do that. Now, we heard you say some things about things that might have happened in classrooms, and certainly, if that's true, that's disturbing to us.
Could be anonymous.
Yeah, it's an anonymous thing. Your children shouldn't have to share, as anybody else's children should have to share their answers, or even answer any answers if they don't feel like they want to. And it should always remain that way in every classroom. So, with that being said, James, I hope you understand the position that we're in, that we must provide it. But if we can do a better job of providing it, then that's on us. We will try to do a better job of providing the survey teacher.
May I ask one question?
Sure.
Why don't they change the policy, or why don't you guys give us that opt-out, like say yes or no, and give it to us email? Because, when we was teenagers, we was real responsible. We wasn't never responsible. I wasn't. I mean, as a teenager, you do what you want. And 6th to 8th graders, they have the worst. They just don't, and parents would, if I was right, a lot of parents would say no to the survey. I mean, that's just what I have talked to a lot of parents. And why can't we change, not an opt-out, but hey, you're going to receive this, this, and this. And, if it's a mandate, that's fine. But give the parents the option to say yes or no, not an opt-out, like here. You feel yes, and then if our kids don't, we don't know what's going on. We're in the blind.
I mean, we can't change Maryland Health Department or the Maryland State Department of Education's process. Certainly the lead team will look at how we inform parents. We certainly can share publicly that we are administering this survey. We send opt-out forms through the class period in which is participating in the survey, basically. So we can look at that process of how we communicate with the appropriate parents. But as far as changing it to an opt-in, we do not have any authority that I'm aware of in our locality to be able to do that. So we won't be able to do that, but we will definitely, I'll work with Mr. Hummel and we'll talk about options for how we communicate with the parents of children who have
Are
to
the
take
surveys accessible before the survey is taken, so that
the surveys are at the school. My understanding, and Mr. Hummel, you correct me if I'm wrong, but when on the opt-out form, it says you can go to the school and review the survey.
before?
It's also on a
public website and we review it anytime.
Correct.
Well, I think the communication part is certainly well understood, that we could, before this is administered the next time, let people know in advance, 2 or 3 weeks in advance, it's going to be administered. If you want to see the survey, here's where you go, here's the link. You look at it. If you want to opt out of it, it's your right.
That's what we're asking.
Yeah, well, we heard what you're asking. I think we'll try to do everything we can to make it better the next time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Jimmy Bentley. I'm a parent. I'm a Christian. I'm also a pastor. I'm very appalled at some of the questions here. If it's okay, I want to read a scripture. I raised my children this way. It says, "My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight, and keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them, and healing to all their flesh. Protect your heart with all diligence, and from it flow the springs of life. Put away from the crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. I believe question 8, 9, especially on the high school survey, is horrible. Questions 59 through 65 is completely inappropriate. And my problem with this is, as a parent, it's my job to protect my children. I don't let my children talk this way. I try to keep them from this type of behavior. And as a parent, I believe I should be the one to control when this conversation and these questions should be asked. Not the state of Maryland, not the Board of Education. And I know, I heard what you all gave the answers to James for, but let's just say, if I went to a workplace and asked any of my coworkers these questions, what would happen to me? I would be terminated and fired for sexual harassment. And so what's to say that little Johnny, he has these questions in school, and 5 years after high school, you know, because no one's ever told him, he goes up to a coworker and asks them these same questions. What's going to happen to little Johnny? These are very appalling things to me. I don't believe that they're appropriate with education. I understand that the state of Maryland is trying to get a survey. My boy even told me that some of his friends intentionally wrote down the most appalling answers just as a laugh. And so your survey is point and void to me anyway. I don't know what this has to do with behavioral health. I don't have a problem with most of the survey, but some of these sexual questions are just ridiculous. And as a parent, I think it's over the top, and I don't want my children to be part of it. I didn't get informed that they was even given this. As a parent, I wasn't even given the option to tell them, hey, no, you can't take that survey. You know, my daughter didn't even understand the survey. And my son, when I started asking him some of the questions, he didn't even know what they meant. You know, I believe that some of these questions, because kids are curious, some of these questions are going to actually lead them to maybe thinking about committing suicide. I think some of these questions about drugs, well, you know, a lot of them don't even know what heroin is, so they're going to go Google it, and who's to say that they're not, because their curiosity, not going to try drugs because now the state has opened it up to their mind. I don't think these children, a lot of them are even old enough to even understand these questions, much less have a survey taken to answer them. And so that's what I have to say. I believe it's horrible. If they're going to give them the survey, then at least educate them about the survey before you give them the survey. And give the parent a chance to even say, hey, I don't want my child participating in such a thing. And as I said, as a father, it's my job to protect my children. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you both for coming in. Appreciate it. Okay, we're going to move on to our next item of business, which is the superintendent's priorities for the FY '23 operating budget. So, Superintendent Baker will make that presentation.
We're tag teaming on this.
I'll find one of those questions on that. It's the middle school.
Well, thank you. We've come this evening, as we do each budget cycle and as part of our budget calendar, to talk to you, sorry, I'll take it off, you'll be able to hear me better, to talk to you about the priorities for this budget and to get some feedback from you, either this evening or in upcoming work sessions over the next month or two. Our objective for the next couple of months, and certainly this evening, is to, again, get some feedback from you all. But one of the things that we're doing a little differently this year, and you'll see the cycle, and I don't need to read it to you, but you're familiar with, you know, we do a lot of internal planning before we get to this point. We meet with principals, we meet with the directors, and then we start trying to define the goals and bring a budget to you, with your input that we can all, work within. This year, we are doing a little bit different. You'll see the very first, budget, or the first bullet underneath where it says the objective. And that is to outline for you, some mandatory items that, are part of the, blueprint for Maryland's future that we must implement. And so that's a little different this year than we've done in years past. And then you'll see, my priorities, again, developed with a number of the people in this room and as part of that cycle. And then again, the last section will be either this evening or moving forward, you helping us, define the priorities. All right, so this is the first step, as I mentioned a minute ago, was the internal planning. The Essa Consolidated Strategic Plan, as we talked about with the results a little bit ago. The strategic plan is all about our ways that we're going to address those needs of the school system. Some of the additional funding of the Federal American Rescue Plan, as I mentioned, the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. We always have to include the Capital Improvement Plan, and that will be part of the discussion in a later slide. And then, as I said, other superintendent and board initiatives, which we'll outline briefly for you this evening. Also, there are individual initiatives, each school's school improvement plan, and then, as I mentioned, with the help of a lot of my team, with the departmental goals and initiatives. Some are in the mandatory, and some are things that we see as a need as recovery from the pandemic, or to address some things that we've been working on for a number of years. Yes?
When you said the word, on slide 2, mandatory items, and then here at the bottom of it, you have mandatory requirements. So are you going to talk more about what the mandatory requirements are that we have to do?
Yes, I think it's a couple of slides.
Okay.
This is Schweitzer, since they're mandatory and they have to be in the budget. She's going to take those 2 slides. But yes, the requirements, regulations, mandatory, all in the next couple of slides. So, step 2, we always take a look at the mission and the goals of the Garrett County Board of Education and the superintendent's goals, and do our very best to align the budget initiatives with the goals of the school system. I don't need to read those to you. You're familiar with our goals. We have not changed them over a number of years. Challenged instructional environment, partnerships with members of the community, which I think is a strength for Garrett County Schools, learning in a safe, secure, and caring environment. That is certainly very different than it was in years past as far as a safe environment. We've initiated a number of things to maintain safety during the pandemic. Being very good stewards of all of the system resources, and of course, all employees being highly qualified and effective in their jobs, and recruiting and working to continually renew our employee and our workforce, which is becoming ever more difficult each year. But it is, of course, one of our main goals. So to address your question, Mrs. Ringer, the next 2 slides are the mandatory things that Mrs. Schweitzer will need to build into the budget. And so I'll give you the clicker, and I'll let you go ahead and work on this slide.
So as Mrs. Baker indicated, this is a little different from priority work sessions in the past. And we have 2 major initiatives that are mandatory. Maintaining and sustaining safe in-person learning is crucial. And we have a lot of federal funding, close to $15 million worth of federal funding that's coming to us, but there are a lot of strings attached. There's a lot of requirements. And it also, unfortunately, doesn't cover all of the expense. So the first bullet is the health and safety initiatives. And we have additional nursing coverage in all of our schools. The PPE supplies, there are many different variables that drive the number of masks we need every day, the number of wipes we need every day. And our staff has been told, do not run out. These are crucial supplies that we need to maintain our in-person instruction. The cleaning staff and supplies, we have additional FTEs working in our schools to continue to clean them. But we are looking at, in fiscal year 2025, those funds expire. The other point is that we've placed estimates in our restricted funding. However, there's large components that must address recovery of instructional loss. So the health and safety initiatives are almost secondary to the instructional requirements that we're seeing with those restricted funding sources. When we talk about instructional recovery, we have two overarching requirements, that of the blueprint for Maryland's future. In the revised bill, there is a requirement for summer programming and additional tutoring for FY22 and 23. Then when we look at the Federal American Rescue Plan, not only are there instructional requirements, summer programming and extended learning options, but we also are required to update and maintain for the community to have feedback our recovery plan. And this communication plan and this stakeholder input is required for the life cycle of this recovery, of this funding. So through September of 2024, every 6 months, we will be seeking stakeholder input, and we will be updating based upon current requirements, like what our recovery, what our in-person learning looks like. Last year, when we finalized the FY21 budget, we used all of the funding that was available to us and some. So we're watching it very carefully. We're concerned, though, that, like I said, the health and safety initiatives are costly. The other part of this is after COVID goes away or becomes whatever the new norm is, what are our health and safety protocols going to look like? Once this federal fundings have gone away, our regular unrestricted operating budget will have to absorb whatever our new normal is for in-person learning.
Before you move on, we have been recognized back last year on the number of students that we did bring back to in-person learning. I made you all aware of an article that was written about the way that we brought students back, and we were one of the leading districts in Maryland for the number of students that we brought back safely. But as Mrs. Schweitzer said, it is very important, as you heard from Mr. Schultz's presentation about learning loss. We know we want our kids in-person learning, but it is very expensive. It's expensive to maintain all of the initiatives to keep our students safe. It is a priority because we know how important it is, but we have spent a tremendous amount of funding to ensure that our kids were able to come back and to come back safely.
For the air quality, does that mean like the air purifiers we doing? Is that air conditioning? What would fall under the air quality that we're still?
So Mr. Wisłowski has a two-phase air quality project. The first phase is complete. They're working right now on the second phase. However, there'll be ongoing expense to maintain those systems.
Replacing those that are altered.
Right, so it is both. It is both. Certainly air conditioning, that works to improve the air quality, but also the filters and all of the other things that we've installed and put in, those require this,
But I think one of the things that you set out, and it's very important to follow up on what Monica just said, is, once we have all this remediation in place and we see that we're making gains and the money stops, we either continue with those gains and find the money for those gains, or we lose those gains almost immediately. And to me, that's the double-edged sword of all this. Yeah, we're getting a lot of money, and we're gonna make some progress with it. But once we make that progress, how do we maintain that progress without getting that money? Along with what else you're gonna tell us here in a few minutes. You know, that to me, that's just...
And there also seems to be a public perception that those funds are unlimited and that they are also unrestricted, which of course is not. They are very restricted to recovery efforts. And as Mrs. Schweitzer said, we've already, you know, we knew it was a goal of the board to ensure that we were not sending any money back, that we were spending all of those dollars. And I think we have done that. And we will, you know, we hope we can make enough gains over the next couple of years to at least address some of the learning loss. But we will have to plan forward for 25, 26, 27 when the funding is not, when this kind of funding is no longer with us.
Summer programming, I know we did that this summer. We had that. Extended learning opportunities before and after school. So this is in the budget to come. So like, will we start that like this fall, right?
Correct.
We're
doing it now. We will continue through the spring, through the summer. And so this is the extended learning opportunities really are right now are not finite. They don't. We really are ongoing during the day. We have intervention. We have remediation after school. And then, of course, during the summer, we will have a number of programs offered this coming summer that will be incorporated in this budget.
So basically, all four of those bullets at the end, we are doing, I mean, summer we can't do now, we did it in
But we're
summer.
we're planning for this coming summer.
But the other three we're currently doing now?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, the reason it's important that we're highlighting it here is that ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 are multi-year restricted awards. So when Dr. Miller was working with all of us to build the plans for that, we were estimating out FY22 we would do this, FY23 we would do this, FY24 we would do that. And so they were all estimates on the number of participants, the number of hours, the number of staff, and also there were estimates on how much that staff, what the per diem of those staff members would be. And as you know, we are facing the Blueprint for Maryland Future restrictions, which are going to be on the next, and it's compressing our ability to have those dollars go as far as what we had estimated because salaries were required to increase our salaries. So we're kind of getting compressed with our federal dollars because of what's happening at the state level. So we had to plan out 3 years with these awards. So there's a lot of, just like any budget, just like any cycle, when you're monitoring it, you have to reflect on what is working, what we can do. And we've also found that, and Mrs. Baker will go through it, but you know, finding the human resources to deliver these programs is challenging.
I guess if I'm a parent watching this and I see you have the last one, academic interventions, tutoring, like do the teachers or an assistant or the principal realize that maybe a student needs more intervention or tutoring? Like the parent doesn't request it, like at school level, they recognize someone
Well,
might need it?
if you remember when, just a short while ago, when Mr. Schultz was talking about iReady and that we would have a diagnostic, better picture at the end of January. That will give us a picture of students that have a great need, students who have a smaller need, and we'll prioritize those. Principals will work with the teachers, Mr. Schultz, Dr. Miller, to prioritize those students so that we provide them with targeted tutoring for what they need. And that's not the only, that isn't even the only diagnostic that we use.
Right.
But that's an ongoing process every school year. We're always assessing where the children are. You know, it's difficult to know where you're going unless you know where you are. And so we're constantly doing that. And so if people are watching that feel like their children really are not thriving yet in the back to in-person, they can certainly reach out to the teacher or the principal, and we will look at providing additional tutoring and interventions for those students.
Okay, so our next mandatory initiative is the Blueprint for Maryland Future Legislation. So it's this law now, and Mrs. Baker's team, we're unpacking what the legislation says. We're working on how to implement it, what it really means. But a couple deadlines that we do know for sure. This current budget cycle for FY23 that we're working on, we will need to allocate funding for salary increases for national board certified teachers. We're estimating right now for FY23 that it could be about $30,000. However, it could be more. In the out years, we're assuming that it could quickly become about $180,000 or more. Then also for FY23 is a minimum school funding requirement, which means that certain portions of our state funding that traditionally had been unrestricted will now be required to be spent. 75% of that per pupil amount must be spent at the school where that student attends.
So the money follows the student.
Money follows the student. And we will have more information on what that looks like when we discuss the revenue at next month's meeting. So that is for foundation, that's for compensatory, the farms numbers for the English learners, special education. So not only are we required, which we've done for several years, to report on our per pupil spending on a school level, now we will be required to on a per pupil school level budget. 75% of the total will have to go to
Total budget in every area?
It's not every area,
Okay.
but it is most. Transportation is one that is not, and there was one other, and it escapes me at this moment, but there are some. Concentration of poverty is one of them, that 100% of the state funding must be spent at that school.
In certain, I guess the point I'm trying to get to is that restricted to certain categories, or is that,
Yes.
if we're gonna give $1 million to Crevlin, let's say, as an example, we decide how we're gonna spend that money, or is it in a line item that must be spent certain ways?
In certain categories.
Yeah.
Whenever we talk about the budget, we have the administration, the mid-level administration, they'll come through in categories that way.
Our hands are tied as to how it is to be spent.
On the school level.
Yeah.
And we've never dissected our budget
Yeah.
that way. We certainly monitor it, and when we're building the budget, we analyze it and we run models to make sure that we're in alignment, to make sure that, but this is a game changer.
And that'll be fiscal year 2023, correct?
The cycle we're working on right now.
Right. And then will finance be the one responsible to keep track of it, I guess? Or we have something, right?
We have to
It'll
build our
follow
budget
right.
this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So our budget, the budget that we bring, that's the superintendent's budget, will likely look different.
Mhm.
And that's why we wanted to make sure that it was very clearly understood that that is mandatory. So the changes that we will have to put in, before we monitored it, now we have to budget and monitor it. So it will look different, and we must do it that way. It is mandatory to do it that way.
Okay, so then in fiscal year 24, we are looking at, we must demonstrate to the AIB that Garrett County Public Schools has increased their teacher salaries by 10% from July 1st, 2019 through June 30th of 2024. In 24, we also have the possibility that we could have a school that could be designated as a concentration of poverty school, which that would have not only funding associated with it, but also restrictions to carry out different programmatic requirements. In FY '25, the career ladders must be negotiated and in place because any teacher that is hired on July 1st of 2024,
Back up to programmatic in 24.
That's what.
That last one about that.
Oh, that's right.
yeah, so in 2024, we understand that the college and career readiness pathways must be offered. So no cost to student, we're still dissecting what that means. We're still dissecting what the costs might be, what the pathways might be. So then in 25, talked about the career ladders. Then in FY 2027, it is required that the minimum teacher salary shall be $60,000. So this is a map or a timeline of estimated, budgetary, like truly budgetary restrictions from the blueprint. Obviously, the 5 pillars that are working on our 5 committee pillars are working on other logistics and reportable, programmatic, logistics, all of that. But these are items that will affect the operating budget.
The concentration of poverty, can you give a little bit of description of what that means for somebody watching, like that's kind of new to our board? Means,
Right. Well, it's new to the whole state of Maryland. So the concentration of poverty, and can step in at any moment, it's dictated by the percentage of free and reduced meal students that attend a school. And there's a sliding scale of at what point you qualify, but there's funding associated of a staffing grant or award that's supposed to help the school meet all of its community needs, health-wise, behavioral, mental, physical.
Right. But with those dollars will come, again, greater oversight, greater, things that we need to implement, as Mrs. Schweitzer said, for the schools. We've always had Title I dollars that have been allocated to schools that are higher in poverty. This is just another layer. And that, by 2024, we may have a school designated.
The information that we've received from other systems that have multiple concentration of poverty schools is that the funding is so restrictive that they can't spend it on what it's required to be spent on because they can't find staff that meet the qualifications to deliver the services that they're requiring. So that's the #1 challenge. The second challenge is that 100% of those dollars have to be spent at that school. So it doesn't allow for administration of the program at a system-wide level.
Terrible. It was very difficult.
So we'll see. That's still to be determined.
Any other questions on?
So that's the answer.
A quick question on the salary up on your fiscal 24. Does teachers receive a 10% salary increase above the negotiated schedule? What does that mean, the negotiated schedule?
So that's the language of the law, and the interpretation is that steps, their movement on the steps. So it's the 10% increase.
So it's a schedule, they're talking about steps there.
Well, so it eliminates steps going towards this 10%.
Okay. I don't think a lot of people might have understood
No,
that.
that's a great point.
Okay, so, when we started putting this presentation together and Mrs. Schweitzer and I landed on the things that were mandatory, the next three slides or so will come as no surprise as far as the ongoing budget priorities for this coming fiscal year. Really, the continued recovery and educating the whole child. And by the whole child, that is not just their academic needs, but of course their emotional, social, health, behavioral needs of students. And then, as we've said several times so far this evening about the difficulty in attracting and maintaining a strong workforce. That has never been an issue before in Garrett County Public Schools. In the last couple of years, it has started to become an issue, and I think it will continue to be. So we're trying to put in a number of initiatives to attract a strong workforce, but that doesn't just include teachers. You know, we're still working with our support staff. We have had great bus drivers that have stayed with us through the entire pandemic, and a lot of districts couldn't say that. I thank them, but we're still working with them on their needs. Certainly administrators, custodians, food service. You know, we did a really nice job through the pandemic of providing meals, and one of my goals is to continue in all of those things that we have been working on for the last couple of years. So I won't, what I did was take those goals and break it down into the next couple of slides. Of course, high academic standards, focusing on that learning loss. A lot of this is from the Essa plan. High quality tier 1 core math and English language arts instruction. You remember from Mr. Schill's presentation a little bit ago, we have a lot of recovery and work to do in mathematics and English language arts. Specific interventions with prioritizing those recovery opportunities, as answer Mrs. Rinker's question from a little bit ago, prioritize those students with the largest gaps. Try to provide evidence-based interventions for those students throughout the school day, after school, and then, of course, continue to stand up a comprehensive summer program. I was very pleased with the summer programming last year, and I think we will only continue to improve on that to really take advantage of these dollars and address these learning losses as quickly as we can. Mr. Hummel helped me with this slide. We do want and need to continue to meet the social, emotional, and behavior needs of our students. We know that the pandemic was very difficult. It continues to be very difficult on our students' mental health. And so, of course, continued focus on those needs of social, emotional learning, support, and programs. Continued focus on behavior support. I know that is a priority of this board, as it should be. So we put in place, Mr. Hummel is new to the position, not hardly new anymore. Pretty soon I won't be able to say that, but he is putting a lot of work into additional data analysis and information, really looking at those FBAs, those functional behavior assessments, and the behavior intervention plans, making sure they're tailored to the child and meeting their needs for behavior. And then that also requires a lot of professional development and support, really looking at awareness, intervention, prevention, and postvention of student needs, and working with our teachers, both seasoned teachers and our new teachers, and anywhere in between that need additional help with addressing student behaviors. And then certainly training our school teams in nonviolent crisis prevention and intervention, the CPI, which really focuses on de-escalation and prevention rather than reaction, I guess. And then, as I mentioned a couple of times, to attract and maintain a strong workforce, Dr. Willerson helped me with this slide, including we have a great, I think, a wonderful mentoring program for our teachers in their first 3 years. We do target their professional development. We have a great partnership with Frostburg State with the Maryland Accelerates program that Dr. Wilderson has taken the lead on, and I think we will see benefits from that program along with placement of interns in our schools. Of course, the blueprint requirements, which will be many for the HR department, and then again, having a strong system of support for those who are pursuing the national board certification, because we know that opportunity, we will probably have a lot more teachers take advantage of that. And then making sure our hiring practices are analyzed for equity and diversity. And then that brings me to the next slide, which was not included in the first three as far as the superintendent's budget priorities. This one is, of course, probably the most difficult slide because we as a school system and as a Board of Education must address the facility utilization. We know that the requirements of the blueprint with the increases in salaries and and just meeting all of the programmatic needs of the blueprint will become increasingly difficult. I want to read that sentence to you. Increasingly difficult, if not impossible, with the current footprint that we have with our school system facilities. We, for a number of years, have been very lucky with a dedicated workforce that we have spread our resources very thin, and everybody has pitched in to work incredibly hard on behalf of our students. But the resources get thinner and thinner when you continue to spread them throughout as many facilities as we have. So we are going to have to address facility utilization, working with Mr. Wazlowski's department and the State Department to continue to provide safe environments that have a better utilization rate and better economy of scale and have more students in each building. You'll see the bullet, our students and our staff deserve quality facilities that are safe and conducive to optimizing learning. That's, of course, what we're looking for all the time. We are working on these next three bullets to eliminate our open space formats. We're working right now on the Grantsville project, but both Broadford and Southern Middle School started as open space. They've sort of closed in, but they are still considered open space formats. Installing air conditioning, Mr. Wazlowski, that we know that improves air quality, and it certainly improves the learning environment we feel for our students. And then we're working through the safety vestibules as well. We've included a number of those in our schools, and I think it has been a great addition to improve safety at those schools that we've been able to install the safety vestibules. And, you know, the state's participation in capital projects, we are very, very appreciative that we are at 90% split now. However, each project is evaluated, and I think a lot of people, and people probably watching this evening, think that as long, you know, now that we're at a 90-10 split and the county is only responsible for 10%, that is a great windfall for us. And while it is wonderful, we only get the money if the projects are approved, and not all projects are approved, especially if our buildings are not utilized in the way that that the folks that are giving us the money or feel that they should be. So a declining student enrollment has impacted our utilization, of course. As I said, the state approval is on a project-by-project basis, and the 90% participation rate, we are, as I said, as far as braiding those funds that we talked about a little bit ago, spending those grant funds, we want to take advantage of that 90% while we have it, because it could change with legislative sessions. Senator Edwards and Delegate Beitzel have been a tremendous help in securing that for Garrett County Public Schools, but we don't know how long that split will last. So we really need to make some very difficult decisions. Certainly the first one will be Broadford and Southern Middle School, but we also have been talking about grade band alignments and several other parts of this particular piece. And that's why this slide is so difficult, because we have 12 wonderful schools, but they aren't fully utilized, and we will have to make some difficult decisions about them. So I've included it here this evening because it will be part of our superintendent's priorities, and I know the board's priorities moving forward.
I have a quick question. So under bullet 2, it talks about installing air conditioning at all facilities. I know specifically at Southern High School, we do have air conditioning, but it's not throughout the entirety of the building. Would that include making the air conditioning throughout the whole facility?
Yes, you're right. It's not just for those that don't have it at all, which we do have some that don't have any.
Right.
But as systems, as they age out and we need to replace them, we've been replacing them with upgraded materials, equipment that would provide it. So it's not, it would be for all schools that don't have it at all or have it partially to so that they have it fully.
Got it. Thank you.
Great question, thank you. And then, oh, yes.
I have a few questions. I had one back on page 7 before I do 11. On page 7, the last bullet, attract and maintain a strong workforce which includes teachers, support staff, bus drivers, administrators, custodians, and food service providers. I don't think we ever did this, and I just got thinking about it. When you go to our website and you look up job postings, you know, like sometimes we might have a pool for a custodian, or we might have a pool for an assistant, or have we ever did a bus driver pool in there, like to be a substitute? Or is that something that we could not do?
Well, as you know, the bus drivers are not our employees, they're contracted. I don't see why we couldn't continue to work to attract new bus drivers. It might not be in the same format as we're advertising for other positions, but certainly we can work through my new PR person in advertising the fact that we are always looking for a whole host of different employees, and certainly bus drivers, bus contractors would fall into that need, you know, for sure.
Well, that's what I was thinking. If someone looked, they might be like, oh, you know, there's a possibility, but if we don't have them there somewhere.
Well, we are working on a new website. There might be a space that we could include openings that are not Garrett County Public Schools employees, but people that we would still be looking for.
Right, to know that it was a need, that's the, okay, and then back to, we're with page 11. She asked a question about air conditioning, that was a good question. So my question on that would be, would that be possibly something, the funding would be through our CIP, through our already operating budget, how, just multiple?
Yeah, so if you recall, the capital improvement plan that Mr. Wojlowski proposed and the board approved does have a multi-year plan to address the air conditioning through a couple different funding sources. The air conditioning at all facilities, installing it is more of a capital expense, but operating it, maintaining it, and paying for the electric is going to be an operating. So it is a stepped approach. And Mr. Wojlowski had, I believe it was going to take 4 or 5 years to get the building that way. And we're working on a lot of different funding sources through the state level to do that.
Because this was a priority at the state level a couple of years ago, and there was some funding. We took advantage of much as we could, but we continue to work with them because it's still a priority. We haven't fully air conditioned every building yet.
Okay, and then we have the Safety Vestibule Initiative. I know before, some of our safety vestibules have been complete with the safety grant, or like, are they still out there, or is that a thing in the past too?
Well, yeah, so the safety grants have changed from being more of a capital expenditure to more of an operating. So that funding has changed. The allowable costs have changed on that.
There's still the funding. It's just what we can spend it on.
Right.
However, we still see it as a priority moving forward. We maybe can leverage some other dollars somehow, you know, install some temporary walls perhaps to increase safety. And certainly Mr. Warnick is evaluating all of those that aren't finished yet.
And so the ones that are left are going to be more like maintenance projects that you see on the operating side.
That we'll do in-house.
Right.
Okay. And then on the one thing you said, Ms. Baker, state has to approve all projects only if something like utilized like it should be. So how do we know if the state will not support a project? For people that, you know, it's a good question, I think.
Well, we submit a proposal for approval and all of the supporting documents, and they let us know if partially or not at all or of it would be approved under the current guidelines.
And it's set like through the CIP, is that how you would present it for the state, or is there
Well, it
other
depends
options?
on the funding source. So there's CIP dollars, there's healthy schools dollars, there are aging schools dollars, every program that is a funding mechanism has different requirements for approval of the project. Now, capital improvement project funding, they look at adjacent schools as well. So if you're asking for approval for a school and it's not close to capacity, they'll start looking at schools that are adjacent by their definition and see whether you can move those students to the adjacent school or renovate that school with those adjacent students. So they are looking at all options, because just like one of the board's goals is to be good stewards of county funds, it's also the state's responsibility to make sure that the projects that they're participating in have the most students utilizing those facilities.
I think it's important to note that we did meet with two of the representatives from the IEC, which is where the funding comes from. They made it very clear to us that if we expect participation from the state, we have to do a much better job showing the utilization of the buildings that we're asking for money. And it made it very clear to us that some of the buildings, they would not be interested in putting any money in. It would clearly be out of our operating budget, basically, for what commissioners would give us. So, you know, even though the 90-10 looks great, it only looks great if you follow the rules by which they have said you must play by.
Right. It's a little deceiving. It is a little deceiving.
It's a little deceiving. And, you know, they control the money, so they control the rules. So we've got to play by those rules, and you know, that's going to be a difficult dance for us over the next.
Well, they have 23 other jurisdictions that are growing or declining, or, you know, they have as Mrs. Schweitzer said, they have a lot to answer to and for as well. And they have set forth a number of requirements, and you're right, they will not provide the funding if the building is not utilized or in the neighborhood of being utilized.
Well, I think they'll be increasingly judicious about where they spend their money now that they're spending 90%. They're paying 90% of the funds in Garrett County. So it's like catch-22. We didn't have the county funds to do these projects in the past. Now we might not have the state
Yeah,
funds to do them.
It's a little disheartening. It really is. But as you know,
Step forward.
they have the
Step
requirements, and that's what we have to stay within.
Come on.
With what you just said about the IAC, I was unable to attend that day. Could we have in writing or get a report from them on possibly maybe buildings that we can't get support from, or if there's a project, like how do we?
I'll let you answer, but I will say this, I can't recall the name of the lead person.
Brett.
Indicated to us he would be glad to come up and make a presentation in public, any public meeting. All we have to do is invite him, a town meeting, whatever, to give their perspective of how they think the money should be spent from the state in helping Garrett County renovate its buildings. So with that being said,
I made a couple of notes. I think we have some supporting documents that we can either present or provide.
When they were up, they didn't see all the schools, so I would hope before they would do a report like that, they would come back and look at the schools that they didn't see.
yeah, it's all about half of them, I guess.
I'm only speaking for me, but I'd be in favor of the IAC.
Yeah.
Well, no,
I wrote that, yeah, I think it's probably.
But I mean, like, when we're getting information, the community's hearing it as well.
Sure.
If they will or will not support.
Well, and I think that they can help make the case for what difficult decisions these are, and that's how important they are, that we can't wait too long.
I have a few more questions that piggybacks all this. This slide's called Address Facility Utilization. So when we talk about the utilization of our buildings, if we're doing this in the budget, and I believe you'll have things in the budget, and the ultimate goal is to approve the budget in April or May, I don't know, I think it's April. So, right, will we actually have the budget next month, and will be more discussion on the facility utilization?
We will definitely have more public presentation next month on facility utilization and the grade band alignment discussion. That's already on the agenda for the February meeting.
And I'm a paper person. That's why I always have so many with me, and I couldn't find it, but I remember, I believe in the past, it's in my brain, like I've heard it over and over, I thought that our buildings were to be, 85% utilized, with the ultimate number somewhere around there to get participation or to get funds from the state, is that correct? I remember hearing that in the past. What is the?
Well, it also depends on the adjacent schools.
Right.
So it can be a range, but if you have an adjacent school that's underutilized or overutilized, that impacts the school you're talking about. So no longer are they just looking at a school in isolation. They're really looking at your system of schools,
Mm-hmm.
but also what's close or has a, maybe not what we think of as close, but an easy path. Because in other counties, they might have 81 riding right in the middle, and there's no way that can be an adjacent school, like, because 81, like, this huge major highway is going, but if there's no major highway, and it's a straight shot from somewhere, they're going to lean towards it being an adjacent school. So they take into account more than just one data point when they're talking about participation in a project.
And there's also been significant changes in the IAC and the process and in the requirements in even the leadership. So, anything in the past that was a drop dead number isn't gonna apply anymore anyway.
Because I just remember hearing that
Yeah.
from before in the past,
Sure.
7 years. Because when I look at it, they were getting grants work on that, but their capacity shows 49%. So that tells me that the percent of capacity in the building isn't the weighing factor like we were told it used to be, and the utilization of the building.
Right, but the priority there was really the safety issue and of the fact that the open classrooms had no doors and it was an open space classroom school. So that was an initiative to renovate that school to enclose those classrooms for educational purposes,
Mm-hmm.
not just as a renovation. I think we just have a couple short ones.
Yeah.
Your
So,
feedback is the next.
Yes, it's a very important part of the work session that we're having here. It's important that we receive your feedback so that as we're helping Mrs. Baker develop her budget, that we can incorporate at the front end as much of the ideals that the elected board has as possible. So we would love to hear any feedback.
Well, one of the, I don't know if it's feedback, but one of the things that anyone listening needs to know is through this Blueprint for Maryland's Future, it's my understanding that around the 27th of the month, we should get what some of our foundation monies are going to be, so that we have a little more understanding as to what is the state's participation in going forward with the mandates they've given us, which will help, help us with our budget outline in terms of, here's what we can expect to get. Certainly working with commissioners, trying to find out what we can expect to get there as well. One of the huge obstacles that we're facing in our county is the reduction of students. And we're losing 100 kids a year with nothing in sight that says that's not going to continue for a while.
And has been for
a long while.
number of years.
I mean, we just keep losing, so $15,000 a student, that's the average. So you lose 100 kids, that's $1.5 million you didn't have next year because you lost that many students. So those are huge obstacles to our budget that we have to consider as to how we play. The other huge obstacle I see going forward for me is personally, when all this federal money runs out, those programs still have to exist in the large part. We're not going to fix all of our problems with our test scores and behavior and all of those things, safety of our buildings overnight. It's not going to happen in 2 years. You know that as well as I do. So there has to be a plan going forward. How do we come up with that kind of money to keep those programs sustainable? Seems
Well,
like
it's a lot of-
doom and gloom.
A lot of data collection on finding which programs are we're getting the best bang for our buck. Which ones we absolutely are mandated to continue, what ones we can adjust or modify in some way, and which ones we would ultimately not be able to continue. And those are those very difficult decisions, you know?
Any suggestions for them?
I mean, you're asking for feedback, it's kind
Yeah.
of hard. I'm a person, it's hard for me to give feedback until I know what I'm giving you feedback
Yeah.
on.
Well, I
like
will
the
certainly
actual
know a lot more
budget,
once
but-
we have the revenue projections, of course.
Right.
But this tonight really is to start thinking about what the mandatory things are, where we're really looking at the different initiatives that we're incorporating, and then all of those capitals.
Mhm. I mean, right off the bat, the first couple pages was mandatory items, so we don't really have a say in that. We know we have to do them, and you have to give them the budget. And piggyback on what Tom said, it's great that it's there, but the thing is about us sustaining them. How are we gonna sustain all these items when the money's gone for things, a lot of them are good things that we hope that you can continue, but,
Well, and we're just starting in negotiations with the bargaining groups, and also working with our subcontractors. We need to, you know, ensure that they, you know, that they are want to continue and stay with Garrett County Schools, as you said. We don't want to get a shortage there either. So we're still working with, there's still a lot of variables that we continue to work with, but feedback from you all in this process is, of course, a vital part of what we need.
I think it'll be very clear to us that in March, or not in March, but in February, when we get all the revenue estimates. And then we have a work session in March, I think 22nd. We have a work session to finalize what we feel should be in our budget. And you know, it is your budget until we decide it's our budget. So, you know, you give us what you think's best, and then we look and tweak and fix and change and ask and debate until we come up with a budget. But it will be, in my 5 years, and of course some of you have been on much longer than me, but in my 30-some years, almost 40 years now involved in the school system, these are unprecedented times. Unprecedented times. Nothing like this has ever occurred.
The blueprint combined with the declining enrollment and the facility issues, it is unprecedented. Ms. Rinker?
I guess there's a question that I will ask, I've asked every year. I'd like to know if we've added any new positions in the budget, and I'd like to know also if we've eliminated any programs or positions. That's a question that is critical. For losing programs, adding people, losing people. And then, like I said a little bit ago, the facility utilization, you have that page, and it would be good to know all of the things that involve around that.
I think one thing that you need to think about facility utilization isn't just the brick and mortar.
Right.
It's also the services that we can provide to the students that are in that facility. And there's a certain point where the people and the resources are stretched so thin that it doesn't matter what the state says the state rated capacity is. Unfortunately, we can't provide what we must provide because we're spread so thin.
So that really was exacerbated during the pandemic because we wanted to have a nurse in every building. We had to have cleaners and screeners, and we had to have additional, everything. And it has continued to stretch our resources very, very thin. So I absolutely agree. It's a whole package, not just the utilization, but the whole package of programs and employees.
Well, you want some feedback. So my feedback is, if these are really tough decisions we're gonna have to make, and I don't think we can do them in a vacuum. We need to hear from the public what they think and weigh all that. And so I would hope you would give sufficient time to get that public input, because it is difficult decisions. And, I think you ought to too, maybe the public has to understand that what type of services you want to provide and what you can't provide, and have that list. So they have a good idea of, what you're proposing, why is it essential, and why would it be beneficial for each individual child that's going to that school. And so that's going to have to be something you probably need to look at, I think. And that will help you with the communication on this plan. And I really hope you get that that time for the necessary feedback.
Well, I think the difference between this priority work session than in the past, this is much more of a multi-year.
So you're looking at a 10-year
Yeah,
plan.
Yeah, we're looking, maybe
Well,
not 10, but maybe
At least five.
five,
Eight,
you know, because the blueprint has their requirements. And so we're planning and we're developing that plan right now in alignment with this budget cycle. So, you know, a lot of the heavy lift is happening for multi-year planning. So it might not be in the FY23 budget, but it might be in the planning for the 24 or the 25 cycle.
Well, you have a risk of having our state local match cut back again.
Yes.
And so that's why it's important to do this planning right now and get stuff in the pipeline, I think.
Yes.
Whether we do it or not, it still has to be, we still have to plan for it and lay it out. This is what we think we need to do.
There's a lot that's interconnected.
Yeah.
You know, you can't just discuss the utilization without discussing the programming or discussing, you know, look at class sizes. You know, there's been years when there, you know, as Mr. Wood said, you know, there were some things that the board, we had priorities and we had built in or taken out that you did or did not agree with. And it was, I wouldn't say easy, but it was not very difficult to make those changes within the budget. I think we will be at a point where that will be increasingly difficult without making either increasing class sizes, or eliminating positions or programs, and that's when the discussions become, of course, much more difficult.
Very good.
We have a calendar, and you are well aware of it, but just so that, as Mr. Glasfelty said, so the public can follow along with where we are, and we'll start getting feedback. Of course, the next board regular meeting is the 9th, and hopefully we'll have draft revenue at that time, and we will work to answer some of the questions you presented tonight. And then at the meeting on the 8th, you'll have a lot more to work with, I believe, at that time. And then we have a work session on the 22nd. We did confirm that we would be presenting. I think some of you did get the calendar invitation and responded. April 4th is the meeting with the commissioners when that practice had gone away for a number of years. We're happy to have that back so that we can talk to the commissioners about what our needs are. And then we're hoping for the April 12th board meeting, Mrs. Rinker alluded to. That is a very quick timeline. This is January already, but we're very hopeful that with some hard work and listening between, you know, and all of our employee groups, that we can have, hopefully, by the April 12th meeting, be ready for adoption.
So when do we think something will be on for people to look at on our website? You know, usually we want input or feedback. We offer it there for them to look at. Would you say what? After
March 8th.
After March 8th? Okay.
And then we were hoping, to Mr. Glasfeldy's point, we could receive feedback at the March 8th meeting and again at the March 22nd meeting, certainly at any time, but certainly through the month of March, we would welcome public feedback, and we'll certainly put that out, that we are seeking feedback on a number of our initiatives.
So the actual budget anticipated, we should get it for our March 8th board meeting, correct?
That's the target.
Does Jason have any questions? Because if he wants to speak.
I don't know, Jason, do you have any questions?
Not at this time, Tom, but I'm sure I will.
Thank you, Jason.
Jason.
Okay, let's move on to inclement weather plan.
Oh, I'll just stay right here.
You're right there.
Okay. Dr. Miller and I are going to tag team, but I think you want to stay there? Join you? All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
Oh, good. Okay, so we have several slides this evening to talk about a plan that we're working on right now, and this is the public portion of that. The state superintendent is working with a number of districts to, if you remember, we thought we would be able to do virtual learning on inclement weather days. There was some legislation, but it didn't go all the way through. And I said at that time, with the new state superintendent, it was possible that we may be able to do this. and in lieu of a snow day, so, it would count as one of the 180, school days. We do have to present a plan to, Mr. Chaudhary, our state superintendent, of, how we would address virtual learning in lieu of, calling a snow day. So, the Maryland State Department does have a number of requirements. We must have a minimum of 4 hours of synchronous instruction, on any day that we, plan for a virtual inclement weather day. We would take attendance. Students must have the opportunity to make up work if they missed, instruction. We will post this plan on our website, and then hope that it does go through the approval process relatively quickly. If there are things that we need to add, hopefully we can add those and get the plan, in place, because this plan is only for this school year. I'm sure he has a plan, moving forward, and I think that's why he's working with just a small number of districts for a pilot program. But we hope that it would, be approved relatively quickly, because we're right in the midst of bad weather, and we just received the, notice to submit a plan over the holiday break. So we're moving as quick as they require a public presentation, and that is tonight. And that was the last, bullet. We have been working, very closely with, Mr. Gank and his team, and Dr. Miller and her instructional team, to ensure that, students have, not only their devices, but access to Wi-Fi. We know, that we will not have 100%. And we will have to build that into our plan for some contingency for, students that do not have access. All secondary students have a laptop that they do take home on a daily basis, or they're supposed to. And, we will have a number of hotspots for anyone that has inadequate or no internet at all. And our principals, you'll see on some of the bullets down below, our principals will work with their staff to determine, who needs a hotspot. And we do have a number of them, but we are going to ask that people, don't just take one or request one because more hotspots doesn't improve your Wi-Fi. It really is for people that don't have any, or they cannot participate without a hotspot. But if they need one, we will provide one. Very similar, for elementary schools. They do have a device allotted for each elementary student. However, typically they don't take them home every single evening. But we did indicate that hotspots would be given to elementary students as well, for anybody that, did not have, sufficient Wi-Fi in their home. All teachers have an GCPS laptop, and the hotspots would apply to staff members as well, since they would have to work from home. If they had inadequate or no, internet, then we would provide them with a hotspot as well. Mr. Lavalley.
Does that include, teachers that might not live in Maryland? Can you give a hotspot to somebody that?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah, we can, as long as they're our employee, yeah.
Yes.
You can? Okay, good.
And then, if, you'll see there at the bottom, the second to last bullet, if a student's home is located, I know there are spots in the county that a hotspot, nothing will work. We'll provide alternative learning options. They've done this a number of years in West Virginia. There are other ways that we can ensure that they are continuing their education. It would be with more like a paper packet that the teachers would prepare for those students. But we found, I think we are landed on about 6 to 7%, we think, from when we were doing virtual instruction before, that really had no ability and had to do paper packets, correct?
Yeah, but it should be noted that since then, there have been,
Right.
many projects in our county to increase broadband. So
Right.
theoretically, that number's probably inflated at this point because of the work that has been done.
Right, so we're hopeful it is lower. And then most of the work with the families will be at the school level. Our principals are aware that we're discussing this evening because they know their families best, and we would have a process in place at each school in which families could request and get a hotspot if they need that.
This is a crazy question, but when you have a snow day, sometimes parents are working and they have to rely on grandparents or a babysitter to come in or something like that. How much skill does a person have that's taking care of these kids to actually load up the computer and help the elementary school students with getting on things? I mean, are we considering that?
Right. Well, yes, certainly we will publicize this plan. One of the bullets you'll see coming up is that we hope to provide as much notice as possible if we were planning to call a virtual day in lieu of a snow day. But I think most families, I can't guarantee all, but I think throughout last year when we were virtual, I think they did develop some plans for who could help them if the parents had to go to work. And I think if we give enough lead time, hopefully, we would be able to continue, that they would have enough time to be able to help their children.
Yeah, and I think, teachers could be instrumental in that as well, as we are in this season of known winter weather. If this plan gets approved, having, weekly practice, and having the students logging in and having increased levels of exposure to, the Schoology platform and virtual in general, I think will go a long way too. And I think principals and teachers will obviously be aware of that importance.
Yeah,
and we have a number of pre-K, kindergarten kids that don't have any experience, so they would definitely need some practice. First grade, second grade would need some practice.
I can see a kindergarten going and
Sure, yeah.
logging into the computer.
Yeah, but they can surprise you.
I guess so. They'd probably be better at it than me, actually.
Yes, absolutely. So, yeah.
I just find something. I know before when everything was virtual, we had some, like we said, they might have been grandparents and they're not technology savvy. So, we had the IT department open, so you think we'll do that then for maybe, we'll do, a lot of them would be okay, but like you said, we have some new students, younger the pre-KK that weren't in school last year, so this is not new for them, maybe whoever their sitter is during the day. So maybe
Yeah, that's been active all along for kids who are on quarantine anyway, so we'll continue to do that.
So maybe we could put that
We
in
can write
here,
that
though,
down.
for one that wouldn't know.
We made some notes, that was great, yeah, make sure we put that in. Would you like to do the accommodation?
Sure. So we obviously are held to high expectations to ensure accommodations for students with disabilities. We will, of course, make sure that that is in place on a virtual learning day due to inclement weather. We'll certainly follow the students' individualized education plans. Those services could be provided synchronously, asynchronously, through supplemental materials. It is very individualized. Every student has an emergency condition component of their IEP that the IEP team has to plan in advance for these types of things. So we would obviously follow those things, or those plans. Supplemental aids and services will certainly continue as outlined in the IEP, and our teachers, general education and special education teachers, will work collaboratively to support students with disabilities with accommodations. And of course, the same goes for 504. Their accommodations will be implemented as well through virtual instruction.
It's my understanding that Dr. Mangus has already addressed this at a much deeper level, correct, and ready to go when and if we need this. So I have no doubt that we will be ready to make sure that we provide for students with disabilities as well. Okay, so we do need to address how this will be communicated to families. We will certainly have the plan. There's a page at the end that's blank that I'll talk about when we get to the end. But we will provide as much notice as we possibly can, as early as it is feasible the day before, so that the teachers can be prepared. The students will know to take home the materials that they need. This will rely heavily on forecasting, and so I want to make sure that we outline for the public that we will still have regular snow days as we've had in the past. We will still, as we had on Friday, we'll wake up in the morning and realize that there's a lot of snow or ice, or heaven forbid, really bad temperatures and ice, as we had one day last week. So we will still have traditional snow days. What we would like to use this for is if they're calling for a weather event that they are almost certain will result in an ice storm or 8 to 10 inches of snow, and the county and state roads tell us, you know, it is unlikely if we get that much snow, we would be able to have school. Or temperatures so low that our buses, as you're aware, you know, diesel fuel gels, and if it gets too cold, our buses can't run. And we would know that the day before, and so we will provide as much notice as we can. We do have our new PR person here. I've mentioned him twice now. We will put our plan out to the public so they will know that this will be an option for this school year, and that we will provide information on how they get a hotspot, how they will get their work. If they don't have internet access, we will communicate that along with any school-specific details, students with disabilities, students that have a different schedule or something like that. So as I said, the principals will have an integral part in not only the hotspots and the Wi-Fi and the devices, but also communicating that this is a possibility, but it is not our only option. We still may have delays, early dismissals, and regular snow days. But you will know enough in advance, I think, to be able to plan a day or two in advance that we would be calling in an inclement weather day in lieu of a snow day.
Leah?
So I just want to clarify really quickly, so this plan is not going to be used for every snow day. It's going to be used for snow days that are called in advance?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Gotcha.
And maybe not even every one that we call in advance. Right now,
Okay.
we're looking, we haven't completely finished the plan because part of this was to get the board's feedback and the public's feedback. But right now, we're looking at perhaps 5 to 6 days that we may use this, especially if there's going to be a multiple day where we know we're going to be home for a couple of days.
Okay.
But we will still have regular snow days as well. So
Gotcha.
it will be both. And we may not use this if we don't have a really bad winter or we don't know enough in advance. We may not use this tool, but my guess is we probably will. Yes, go ahead.
So even if the forecast doesn't pan out, and they're calling for 10 inches of snow and we get 1, you can still do that virtual day if you
Correct.
notified everybody in
If
advance.
we called it and notified everybody and they've made plans and the forecast doesn't pan out, we would have to stay with the virtual day because everybody had made their plans, based on that. But if it's on the, not 100% sure, or they're, I'm sorry.
Well, you're never 100% sure.
Well, yeah,
Whatever,
that's
anyway.
true. But sometimes they're closer than others, I think. They tell us their confidence level as we get those
Yeah, if
reports.
there's a big storm coming over the
Correct.
East Coast. or
We see a
something.
nor'easter coming up that's when we would use this.
So, from the communication process, so we, parents, would still be notified the same way, whether it was the robocall, email? And do you think possibly you might give them like a name, you know, like?
Right, yes, but we're gonna try and think of something that people would be able to relate that this is a different than a regular snow day.
Yeah, so it'll be clear when you get to call, like,
Right.
is school closed? Or would it be,
Virtual learning, yeah.
yeah, would be called something else? So that the
Alternative learning
parents-
day.
Right, yeah. We'll make sure that we
Make
make
it
it
clear,
clear. It's a very good
because it's
feedback.
something, a new concept to
Right.
parents
It is.
to,
Well, people in nearby West Virginia have been doing this for years, and I got a lot of feedback as the years I've been superintendent. Why don't we do this? And the reason was we were never allowed to do this. It was not an option in Maryland. So I'm actually very thankful that it is something that is becoming an option, and so we'll have to work through it as a pilot program and really learn from it and find ways that we can enhance it and make sure people understand the goal. All right, you want to do the attendance?
Sure. So the attendance policy will obviously be very more detailed than what's on the screen, but this is a high-level view. One important component is that, as you saw earlier, the state, in order to have an approved plan, is expecting 4 hours of synchronous instruction daily for all students. So the expectation for students to be present would be that they would be live on their Google Meets, getting instruction from their teachers to be counted present. There is an exception, of course, as Ms. Baker had referenced earlier, this small percentage of students that there is no way for them to get online would have an alternative work path and way of being marked present.
If a student is absent from instruction, from live instruction on that day, they would be coded with an excused absence, and we would follow the makeup policy. As you know, that was another one of the requirements, is that work would be able to be made up. And tonight you're seeing a very high-level view of this plan. On the last slide, there was a suggestion that like school schedules, sample schedules, not actual schedules of individual students, but sample schedules would be in our plan. The full attendance policy would be in our plan. And we would leverage procedures and policies that we had in place when we were in virtual learning. You know, so those are things that we're going to obviously be working on pulling. We also know that, you know, we have started working with principals to discuss the needs of buildings, but they're also going to have to engage their staff. We're going to have to engage unions as well, our GCA members and GASA. We've already started with the principals, but those components are going to all have to be hashed out as we finalize this plan before we submit to MSD. And that, I believe,
That's actually,
concludes our...
right, this slide, you know, when I left it blank, we talked about it earlier today. It would be difficult at this juncture to provide sample schedules. You know, we really need to work with the principals. We really do need to engage GCEA first. But when the plan has been approved and as submitted, or if we have to enhance it, we will provide some sample schedules and what it will look like at the elementary level, middle school level, and high school level. But that will be included, because I know that, yeah, I think that was a suggestion. It might have been in yours, Mrs. Drinker, of you know, so parents could see what would be similar when they were in person, or what was similar to when they were virtual before. But we have some work to do on that.
Okay, one final thing before I ask for a motion. This is an action item tonight. Best case scenario, from start to finish, state board or MSD approves. What are we looking at? Best case scenario.
As I said, I believe the state superintendent is working with a very small number of counties at this juncture. So I don't think, and I do believe he's planning to approve it. I don't know that it has to go to MSDE, but we will get it to MSDE before the next board meeting in case it has to go to the state board. So I'm hopeful that we can submit it plenty in advance, which we have time. If there's any enhancements or things that need clarified, we can present those. I'm hoping maximum of 2 weeks, minimum of a week, but I think he's expecting our plan. I told him we would be doing the public presentation this evening and submitting a plan on behalf of Garrett County Public Schools, and so they know it's coming. And so I'm hopeful that that it's very comprehensive. What we have so far is, and I think hopefully it would be approved, you know, before too much more winter goes by.
Okay, you've heard the plan and you know those crux of what's planned for Compass. I'll take a motion.
I make a motion, Tom.
Okay. I'm gonna give you the second since Monica beat you to the motion.
Sure.
Monica, second by Jason. Any further questions or discussion?
You know, no matter what, you know, I know you said it's gonna be optional, but I'd at least try to do it once or twice, because we could be, you know, I think other jurisdictions are gonna be looking at us, and the superintendent's gonna be looking, state superintendent's gonna be looking at us and saying,
Yes.
can they make this work? Is it possible to make this work? So,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, it's funny, you know, normally this is a completely different year so far, that we've only had one snow day, and our friends to the east have had 2 or 3 or 4 already. So I think they will be very interested in having this option as well moving forward.
It seems like the weather patterns are changing.
It's just very, yes, well, I'll take it. It was.
Yeah.
Well, it's just, so I guess when it's all approved, I guess you'll put it on the website or let people know that, okay, it's approved, so maybe, you know, now it can happen at some time.
Right,
You know what I mean?
right. And I think you had asked me earlier, we would not then have to get approval each time. Once the plan is approved, then we would have the discretion of when to use it. And we would not have to then ask again to ensure that it counted towards the 180. Once the plan is approved, if we call a virtual day in lieu of a snow day, it would be approved as one of the 180, which I think is important for the public to know. We also discussed doing press that went out to our constituents, everybody in our community, that indicated that we are working towards this process, pending MSD
Right.
approval, obviously after you guys all bless it as well, that we are working towards this because principals and teachers are going to need to be working with students and families in order to prepare. So we obviously want them to know what we're preparing for and why we're doing what we're doing. Hotspots is one key component of that. We want to distribute them in advance if possible. We don't want to wait till the time that we need it and then do it. So we want the public to know why we're doing those things. We obviously will have to have MSD approval first, and then we'll do another, I think we discussed doing another series of press, yeah.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor, a second, to accept the winter weather plan as presented. Those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. And it is a unanimous vote.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Schweitzer, I think you're back up again for our quarterly financial report.
This is an informational item for the board. We are back to a much more normal year. So when you compare to fiscal year 21, you recall we had a couple different instructional models. At this point in time, we were in a completely virtual model. So the large variances that you see are primarily driven by the way that we're doing our performing our work. So some of the large variances, instructional other, that's the licensing, reimbursable mileage, reimbursable expenses. So that's running, we're spending that money quicker than we did in the prior year, but when you compare it to fiscal year 2020, you know, we're in line. It's not anything to be concerned about. It's the same for pupil transportation, because if you recall, we did pay our bus contractors, but we weren't paying the fuel portion. Also, we have field trips that are occurring. So we have that expense, and we're not out of line with our budget. We're just spending it more in line with what we traditionally do. Maintenance is spent over 50%. Mr. Wisłowski and his team did a really good job of trying to get as much done this summer as possible, and front-loading their projects. And then the last large variance is in fixed charges, and we made a change this year with our deduction holiday. So we pay over 26 pays, but a deduction for benefits is only taken 24 times. So traditionally we had taken that, so there are 2 pays that don't have the deduction for insurance or other benefits. And so traditionally it had been the last pay period of December of the calendar year. However, we have moved it to the first pay of the next calendar year. So this is just a timing issue. It's not anything to be worried about. The capital outlay changes that you see are due to the accident playground. We received funding for that, so it's not really a transfer, it's a budget amendment. And then we also have the Northern Middle PA system that we did. Any questions?
Yeah, any particular questions about any of those? The biggest thing you said that I needed to hear was we're pretty much the same as 2020. It's hard to compare to last year because that's such a unique year.
And we're also so new into the raise for the subs, the 50-cent hourly rate, that it's difficult to gauge the exact consequence that we're going to see from that. So we will be bringing budget transfers to the board next month. Because of the change to the hourly rate, we postponed that to February so that we could get another couple pay periods in to see exactly what that looks like.
Okay.
I just have one question. Can't remember, you have your transfers and you have your, dollar amount there. Some have the quotation marks around, some don't. Does that mean they were transferred into that or transferred out of that category?
The parentheses are a negative, so that means overall it was negative with leaving that
Oh, okay,
category.
okay. Right. I mean, I'm sure if I look back at my papers, we had that in the budget transfers, but I couldn't remember what the marks meant. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go down to, committees, I guess, meeting times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, first we need to,
Well, the meeting times first, then we'll get, I think we're just,
we gotta continue.
yeah. Yeah, we've been meeting second Tuesday of the month at 4 PM, unless moved a little ahead. Is there a motion as such?
Yeah, I make a motion to continue second Tuesday at 4 PM.
Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by,
There was a difference, Jason.
thank you, Jason. Rodney said, give it to you. So there was a motion on the floor that we will continue with the second Tuesday of the month at approximately 4 PM. Those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And it's unanimous. Date and time. Now comes, our selection of legal counsel.
I think we should probably.
Pardon me?
We should probably consider, options.
It's always fun when they talk about it.
Yeah, true. We're fortunate that we have a legal counsel that we prize very much, questionably about that. So I will take a motion that we retain our legal counsel.
Make a motion to continue to appoint Brandon Hoover as board counsel.
There's a motion on the floor to appoint Brandon Hoover as our legal counsel. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Rodney beats you by millisecond. He said he wanted it, so I'm sorry, Jason. By Mr. Gosfelty. Is there any discussion? All those, in favor of retaining, Brandon as our legal counsel? Okay, but.
Aye.
Opposed, nay?
Thanks.
Sure.
Thank you all. It's an honor to represent this board. First, named as your counsel on May 19th of 2016. I'm a graduate of the Garrett County School System. You all educated me. I'm pleased with the education I received and my honor to be here to serve as your counsel now. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate all the insights you give us and always there to answer any questions that any of us might have. Okay, now it takes us to committee assignments. You have the assignments in front of you. Is there anybody who wants a different one? Add more to their plate?
Speak up if you want to take my place.
Yeah, anyone want City of the Babe committees?
Yeah, you're good, Rodney. Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
On the main committees, you don't list that I'm on the executive board of name, so.
Yeah, we probably need to put that
Yeah.
on there somewhere. Can you do that, Karen? And certainly take a look at it. If there's something that you would like to add to or something that you would rather transfer to, just let myself or Barb or somebody know and we'll make those adjustments. If we don't hear anything, those will be our committee assignments. Okay, you patiently waited, Leah. Sorry.
Yes, I did. That's okay.
Your turn.
So I'll start out with the Garrett County Association of Student Councils, or I usually refer to it as GCSC. We hosted our second General Assembly on Thursday, December 16th. We started off with icebreakers led by Southern Middle School Student Councils. These icebreakers included discussing winter holiday plans and having a gingerbread house competition, which my team won, by the way.
Very good.
Just to update you on that as well. Just to brag a little bit. The officers, including myself, gave a presentation on final studying tips and ways to combat procrastination.
I hosted an open table discussion between northern and southern middle schools and high schools to brainstorm different ways to come together as a county to fix certain issues we find within our schools. I was able to guide student leaders in how to address these issues in the best way possible, whether that be through student council activities, speaking with their principals and administration, or speaking with me specifically to talk to our superintendent or bring it to a meeting. As for specific school-wide updates, Southern High Student Council is leading a countywide limiting waste initiative. At the General Assembly, we discussed how we could present this plan cohesively as GCSC. More information will come on this initiative in the weeks to come. Southern High School is also beginning to plan its winter homecoming, which as of now will take place on February 13th. And the theme will be Secret Garden. Our holiday gift shop was successful and provided gifts for the families of students who may not have been able to purchase gifts otherwise. Northern High School's similar winter wish tree was also successful, and the council was able to fulfill nearly every wish that was found on the bulbs of the tree. That's all I have for this month. Any questions?
I have one.
Yes.
What would you say would have been one of your, you said final studying tips? Can you tell us like one
Yes.
thing that would have been?
So one thing that I came across that I kind of found interesting was for big tests like the SAT, where you're studying weeks in advance. The night before the test, you're supposed to just take like a relaxing evening, have a good meal, rather than try to cram study the night before. That helps your nervous system be calm and cool and collected for your test the next morning. I did that when I took the SAT and it turned out well for me, so that was my favorite one.
I did that.
Yep.
I should have thought of that. I was always led.
Any other questions or comments for Leah? Okay, thank you, Leah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You have an informational item, the mileage rate change for your January mileage, and you turn that in next month. There's a change there. And we are now going back to executive session. That ends the public session portion of our meeting this evening. Thank you for